Chapter 5. Claudia laughed. Get serious, Maria. That boy was real. He told me his name was Daniel. I thought he was real too, Maria replied softly, her expression solemn. I thought he was real the times I saw him, but he isn't. He's a ghost. Joy's green eyes sparkled to life. You mean your house is haunted? She asked. Maria nodded and pointed to the tall window that faced out the back. He lives in a guest house, I think, she told Joy. That's where I've seen him the most. You've seen him a lot? Joy asked. Sophie shoved her plate away and stared intently across the table at Maria. Claudia's mouth was twisted in a skeptical smile. Once I saw him on the tennis court, Maria said, her blue eyes darting from girl to girl. He was dressed in white, in old-fashioned clothes, very starched. He was holding a weird tennis racket made of wood, I guess. He had the saddest look on his face. I waved to him. Did you play tennis with him? Claudia asked sarcastically. Maria shook her head, ignoring Claudia's tone. He turned toward me and realized I could see him. He stared at me for a second, that sad expression on his face, then he disappeared. She snapped her fingers. Poof, into thin air. Claudia narrowed her eyes and studied Maria. You're serious, aren't you? She said. Yeah, it's all true, Maria told her. But this boy had to be real, Claudia protested. He shoveled away the sand with his hands. He pulled me to my feet. I touched him, Maria. I had my arm around his shoulders. Solid shoulders. Real shoulders. And he didn't feel strange to you? Maria asked. Well, Claudia hesitated. His skin was very cold, but... See? Maria slapped her hand triumphantly on the table. His skin was cold because he's dead, Claude? Claudia's mouth dropped open. He told me he had just been swimming, she said, thinking hard. His skin was cold from the ocean. No, Maria shook her head. That was his excuse? He's dead, Claude. He's been dead for 100 years? How do you know that? Joy asked excitedly, twirling a strand of black hair into a corkscrew and tugging it over her forehead. Have you talked with him? No, Maria replied, turning to Joy. The real estate agent told us about him when he sold us this place. He said a boy had been murdered in a guest house 100 years ago. The murderer was never found. The agent said that since then, the boy had been seen haunting the grounds, going for solitary swims, walking in the gardens. Maria took a long drink of tea, then continued in a hushed voice. I've seen him 3 times. The last time he came very near. I think he wanted to tell me something, but he acted very shy. I said hello to him, and he disappeared. Wow, Joy muttered, shaking her head. He's very handsome, Maria said, in an old-fashioned way. Weird, Sophie muttered, obviously a little frightened. I want to see him, Joy declared. I really do believe in ghosts. I've always wanted to see one. His skin was so cold, Claudia admitted thoughtfully. Even in the hot sun, his skin was cold. Cold as death. She shuddered. I can't believe a ghost saved my life this afternoon. To her surprise, Maria laughed. Then don't believe it? She cried. Huh? Claudia was bewildered by Maria. What do you mean? I made it all up, Maria confessed, and uttered a gleeful laugh, her blue eyes glittering. You what? Claudia and Joy cried in unison. Sophie pushed her glasses up on her nose, stunned. I made it all up, Maria told them, unable to hide how pleased she was. The whole story? There is no ghost boy, no murder in the guest house, no boy on the tennis court with a sad expression. Maria! Claudia screamed angrily. She stood up, grabbed Maria by the neck and pretended to strangle her. Maria collapsed in gales of laughter. I believed her. I really did, Joy confessed. Me too, Sophie said, shaking her head. Wish I had my camcorder, Maria cried gleefully. The expressions on your faces, so serious. She turned to Claudia. I'm really surprised at you, Claude. At camp, you were always the one who could scare us with your crazy ghost stories. You were always the one with the wild imagination. How could you fall for my stupid little story? Claudia could feel her face grow red. She couldn't decide if she was more angry or embarrassed. A boy really did help me, she insisted shrilly. Daniel, he really did rescue me, and he did vanish into thin air. Yeah, really? Maria cried, and began laughing again. Well, Daniel, Claudia thought, frowning, if you aren't a ghost, then who are you? Claudia pushed back the lacy white curtains and peered at the night through the French doors of her room. Even with the doors closed, she could hear the steady wash of ocean waves against the shore. Spotlights sent out yellow cones of light over the back lawn. The tennis court and rectangular swimming pool were nearly as well lit as they would be during the day. After dinner, the girls had watched a tape of Bye Bye Birdie that Maria had rented. The old musical was a riot, Claudia thought. The girls had hooted with laughter at the funny way the 50s-style teenagers were dressed, and at the hilariously sexist attitudes. Those girls were so dumb, Sophie had exclaimed. They only cared about pleasing boys. Yeah, not at all like today, Claudia replied, rolling her eyes. After the movie, they had said goodnight and made their way upstairs to their rooms. Feeling sleepy, her face burning from her sunburn and chills running down her back, Claudia had taken a hot bath. Then she changed into a long nightshirt and carefully applied more cream to her face. Now, yawning, she found herself leaning against a glass door, taking one last peek at the back lawn before tucking herself in. It was all so beautiful, so luxurious. Listening to the faint roar of the ocean behind the cliff, she felt as if in a fantasy world. She uttered a little gasp when she saw the light flicker on in a guest house window. Raising her hands to the sides of her face, she narrowed her gaze and squinted hard. Yes, a shadow was moving in the guest house window. A pale light flickered there. Someone is in there, Claudia thought, staring hard, her nose pressed against the glass. For a brief second, she thought she recognized the shadow figure. Is it Daniel? She wondered. Is it the ghost boy? Then, an icy hand, cold as death, gripped Claudia's shoulder. Chapter 6. Claudia cried out in fright. She spun around, gasping for breath to scream again. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, Maria said, lowering her hand. Maria, Claudia stammered, breathing hard. She could still feel the chill of Maria's cold hand. You were concentrating so hard on what's outside that you didn't hear me call you? Maria said, her blue eyes locked on Claudia's. Claudia stepped back to pull the curtains over the glass door. I saw the shadow of someone, she told Maria, in the guest house. Huh? Maria appeared surprised. She moved toward the glass door and pulled the curtain back. A light in the guest house? A light in the guest house, Claudia repeated. No way, Maria said, shaking her head. There's no one staying there, Claude. The guest house has been empty all summer. But I saw someone, Claudia began. Probably a reflection, Maria said, moving back. These spotlights are so bright. Daddy had them installed to discourage prowlers, but they throw so much light. You must have seen a reflection in the guest house window, that's all. I guess, Claudia replied doubtfully. I just came in to see if you needed anything, Maria said. No thanks, I'm fine, Claudia replied. She yawned. The sun really knocked me out. Such a bad burn, Maria said. Something about the way she said it struck Claudia as odd. Maria hadn't sounded sympathetic. She sounded pleased. No, I'm just overtired, Claudia scolded herself. I'm starting to get really paranoid. She said goodnight to Maria, turned off the light, and climbed between the satiny sheets of the enormous four-poster bed. A few seconds later, she drifted off to sleep, the dark, handsome face of Daniel, the ghost boy, floating in her mind. When Claudia awoke the next morning, she stretched luxuriously on her bed. Morning sunlight filtered in through the lacy curtains covering the French doors. One door had been left ajar a few inches, and she could smell tangy salt air and hear waves falling onto the shore. Any place in this house I can always hear the ocean, she thought, smiling. She pushed back the sheet and light summer comforter and sat up, enjoying the elegantly furnished room. A cherrywood dressing table and mirror stood directly across from the bed. Beside them was a matching chest of drawers. On the adjoining wall a small, ornate desk, complete with writing paper and a fountain pen. A cut crystal vase filled with fresh flowers was on the corner of the desk, and the dressing table held tiny vials of perfume. A door beside the desk led to a private bathroom. Claudia thought she liked the bathroom best of all. The night before, lying back in the deep bathtub, she had raised her eyes and realized that the entire ceiling was painted with pictures of mermaids. This guest bedroom was a long way from the cramped room on Fear Street that she had shared with her younger sister Cass. I could get used to this luxury, Claudia decided. What was it like for Maria to live like this all the time? Did she even notice how beautiful it all was? Claudia didn't know very much about Maria's family, but she knew that her father, Anthony Drexel, was a financial wizard. He made his money buying up companies around the globe, and it seemed Maria usually communicated with him by phoning Vienna, or Stockholm, or Barcelona. Mrs. Drexel was, in Maria's words, a socialite. She accompanied her husband everywhere, and spent most of her time making the rounds of international benefits. It must get lonely for Maria, Claudia thought. No wonder she wanted company for a whole week, rather than be alone in this big house. Alfred seems like a nice guy, but he wouldn't be much company. Claudia got out of bed and sat down at the dressing table to examine her sunburn. Her skin was still an alarming shade of red, and it hurt to raise her eyebrows or wrinkle her nose, or even smile. What's wrong with you, Claudia? She asked her reflection. It was the first time in years she'd gotten burned. She'd been crazy to agree to let the others bury her in sand, and crazier still to fall asleep in the sun, though the antihistamine had had something to do with that. Why hadn't one of the girls awakened her? She couldn't believe they'd forgotten. They knew how easily she burned. How could they have left her to fall asleep like that? Claudia smoothed some aloe gel onto her face and then hurried to get dressed. She put on a yellow t-shirt, black spandex shorts, and white sneakers, and headed downstairs past Joy's and Sophie's rooms. Their doors were still shut. Claudia checked her watch. It was 9 in the morning. They'd all turned in fairly early the night before. How could they sleep late with all that bright sunlight streaming in, she wondered. Downstairs, she found Maria in the kitchen, wearing crisp white shorts and a pale pink top. "Alfred, fix us a fruit salad, biscuits, and some sausage," Maria said, motioning to a row of blue and white china serving dishes on the counter. "Help yourself?" "I guess Joy and Sophie are still asleep," Claudia said. "Joy hates getting up before noon," Maria reminded her. "And Sophie loves doing whatever Joy does," Claudia added with a smile. It was true. At Camp Full Moon, Sophie had practically worshipped Joy, copying her every move. "How about a game of tennis before they wake up?" Claudia suggested, spooning fruit salad into a bowl. Tennis was Claudia's sport. At camp, she remembered, she and Maria had been fairly evenly matched. But Maria said that her father was going to get her a private coach, so she was probably terrific now. "Well, okay," Maria said reluctantly. "A short match? You don't want to get too much sun, Claude?" "I'll be careful," Claudia replied. Once again, she had the uneasy feeling that Maria was gloating about her sunburn. She dished up the fruit salad and tried to ignore it. The tennis match was not what Claudia had expected. Maria couldn't do anything right. She had never had a problem with Claudia's serve at camp, but today she failed to return ball after ball. "The sun is in my eyes," she explained, shaking her head, kicking at the red clay court. They traded sides. To Claudia's surprise, Maria misjudged balls, swung widely, and hit the ball high in the air as if she were a beginner. Those private lessons have wrecked her game, Claudia thought. She was winning in straight sets and hadn't even worked up a sweat. "It's just not my day. My muscles are tired or something," Maria cried unhappily. Angrily, she threw her racket down. "You'll probably beat me easily next time," Claudia said, jogging over to her. Maria scowled and studied her toes, avoiding Claudia's eyes. "I'm out of practice," she muttered. "I haven't had time to play this year." Claudia stepped up beside her as they headed slowly back to the house. She placed a hand lightly on Maria's shoulder. "Maybe you're upset seeing us again," she said softly. Maria turned to her, her blue eyes wide. "Upset?" "You know," Claudia insisted. "You haven't seen us since the accident, since your sister died?" Maria's face turned bright red. She tugged the hairband out of her hair and shook her blonde hair free. "I don't want to talk about Allison," she replied, still avoiding Claudia's eyes. "It's on all of our minds," Claudia said. "We know how you must feel, Maria. "I told you," Maria shouted shrilly. "I don't want to talk about that." She turned abruptly, her eyes narrowed into slits, her cheeks bright scarlet, and stormed angrily toward the house. When Claudia finally returned to the house, she was pleased to see that Maria had calmed down. Joy, Sophie, and Maria were seated at a white umbrella table on the terrace, chatting as they ate their breakfast. Behind them, Alfred was humming pleasantly as he pruned a row of rhododendrons near the guest house. "How was your tennis game?" Joy asked Claudia, as Claudia pulled a canvas chair into the shade of the umbrella. "She let me win," Claudia joked, glancing at Maria. "She wants me to get overconfident, then she's going to slaughter me." Maria forced a smile. "Claudia's game has really improved," she said, and poured herself a glass of orange juice from a tall glass pitcher. "Looks like a great beach day," Joy exclaimed, raising her eyes to the cloudless blue sky. "I can't wait," Sophie declared. "Alfred packed us a picnic lunch," Maria told them. "We can carry it down and have lunch on the beach." "I hope there are good waves," Joy said to Maria. "I want to try out one of your boogie boards." "The waves are always pretty strong," Maria told her. "There aren't any sandbars or anything to break them up." She took a long drink of orange juice, then turned to Claudia. "Do you want to stay up here and avoid the sun?" Claudia hesitated. "No, I thought I could take a beach umbrella down to the sand and just stay in the shade." "Good idea," Maria replied. She shouted to Alfred to fetch a beach umbrella from the equipment shed. A short while later, the four girls were making their way across the back lawn toward the steps leading down to the ocean. Claudia carried a yellow and white striped beach umbrella over her shoulder. Ahead of her, Maria and Joy each gripped one handle of the large styrofoam cooler that held their lunch. Sophie led the way. As they neared the cliff edge, the roar of the ocean grew louder. Shielding her eyes from the bright sun, Claudia could see the dark form of a seagull soaring high above them against the bright blue sky. Not yet 11, and it was already hot. The air hung wet and heavy without a breeze. "I'm going to take a short swim," Claudia thought, shifting the weight of the beach umbrella on her shoulder. If I slather my face with sunscreen, my burn won't get worse. They hesitated at the metal gate. Just turn the handle, Maria instructed Sophie. It'll open. Balancing the beach umbrella, Claudia watched Sophie grab the oval handle on the gate. Then she watched Sophie appear to freeze as a loud crackling burst from the gate. Claudia uttered a horrified gasp as Sophie's body shot backward, and she slumped to the ground. Chapter 7. Maria was the first to move. She dove toward a control panel hidden behind some low shrubs and tugged down a switch. Claudia tossed down the beach umbrella and lowered herself to the ground beside her fallen friend. Sophie stared up at her with unfocused eyes. Her glasses had flown off, and Claudia picked them up from the ground. "Sophie, are you okay?" Claudia demanded, holding the glasses. "Yeah, I guess." Sophie blinked once, twice. The color began to return to her ghostly white face. Maria knelt beside Claudia and leaned over Sophie. "You had a nasty shock," she said, shaking her head. Sophie seemed confused as she started to sit up. "My whole body is buzzing." Maria gently helped her up. She turned toward the house and yelled for Alfred, cupping her hands into a megaphone. The servant must have gone into the house because there was no sign of him. "I don't get this," Maria declared, raising her eyes to Claudia. "I just don't get this. The electrical system is supposed to turn itself off during the day?" Sophie groaned. "Ow," she muttered, and began to rub the back of her neck. "It hurts back here. The muscles are all tight." "Are you sure you're okay?" Joy demanded, still lingering several feet away. "Do you feel dizzy or anything?" "I'm okay," Sophie answered, still rubbing the back of her neck. "Ow, that really did hurt, though." "You could have been killed," Joy shrieked, her shoulders beginning to tremble under the loose top she wore over her bathing suit. "Joy, please," Maria muttered impatiently. "Sophie is all right. Don't carry on and make it worse." Joy muttered an apology. "How do you feel, Sophie?" Claudia asked softly. "Better?" "Yeah," Sophie nodded. "I'm just afraid the shock made my hair even more frizzy." Everyone laughed except for Maria. She rose to her feet and began pacing in front of them, her hands balled into tight fists at her side. "I don't understand this," she kept muttering. "That system is not on during the day. It goes off automatically." "Maybe the timer is broken," Claudia suggested, helping Sophie to her feet. Sophie took her glasses from Claudia and slipped them on with a shaky hand. "She could have been killed," Joy repeated. Maria flashed Joy an impatient look. Then her expression softened as she turned back to Sophie. "I'm so sorry. Really? I'm so sorry. Do you want to go back into the house?" "No, no way," Sophie declared, motioning for Maria to stop. "I'm okay, really. My heart is racing a little, but I feel fine. Let's get down to the beach. Let's not spoil this beautiful day." "But the shock," Joy began. "It just woke me up, that's all," Sophie said, forcing a smile. "Really, we have only 1 week together. I don't want to spoil it." "If you're sure," Maria said, studying Sophie's face. "Tell you what," Sophie said. "I'll stay in the shade with Claudia, okay? I'll rest for a bit in the shade. My body's just tingling a bit. I'm a little shaky, that's all." Maria stared at Sophie thoughtfully, then shrugged. "Well, okay, but if you start to feel weird, let us know." Sophie agreed. Joy had finally calmed down and hoisted the heavy cooler up by herself. "We're all getting cooked here," Claudia joked. "First, I get barbecued by the sun. Now Sophie nearly gets fried by the gate." Claudia meant it as a light remark, but Maria took it to heart. "They were accidents, right?" Maria snapped angrily, as if challenging Claudia. "Yeah, of course," Claudia replied quickly, her voice rising. "Of course they were just accidents, Maria." "Don't worry. When we get back, I'm going to speak to Alfred," Maria proclaimed in a low voice filled with menace. They made their way down the wooden stairs slowly, with Maria leading the way. Far below, Claudia could see the sparkling blue-green ocean ending as white froth on the sandy shore. The air grew cooler, saltier, but the hot sun still burned down on Claudia's shoulders. By the time Claudia had descended the stairs and stepped onto the beach, Maria was spreading the blanket. Joy had set the heavy cooler down. She spread out a brightly colored beach towel of her own. Then she pulled off her top, revealing a shiny green bikini underneath, and immediately began to brush out her long black hair. Well, that was one thing that hadn't changed from camp, Claudia thought dryly. Joy is still brushing her hair out at every opportunity. Maria had spread the blanket out a good distance from the stairs. As Claudia trudged toward it with Sophie at her side, she felt burning grains of sand slide through her thongs and onto her feet. What a scorcher, Claudia thought, gazing up at the sun, which seemed to fill the entire sky. At Maria's direction, she stood the beach umbrella up at the edge of the blanket, then buried it deep in the sand, bearing down with all her weight. As soon as the umbrella was spread, Sophie lowered herself into its shade and stretched out on her stomach. Claudia reached for the beach bag and began covering her sunburned face with a thick layer of pink sunscreen. "You look gorgeous," Joy trilled. "Oh, shut up," Claudia muttered, laughing. Adjusting the straps of her purple one-piece swimsuit, she began to apply the pink sunscreen to the rest of her body. Joy, meanwhile, had put down her hairbrush and was rubbing a light tanning oil over her already tanned body. Claudia turned her eyes to Maria, who was still working at getting the blanket perfectly smooth. How strange, Claudia thought, her eyes on Maria's slender back. Maria isn't tan at all. In fact, she's very pale. It struck Claudia as strange because Maria had told them she spent most of the summer here at the beach. How has she managed to avoid the sun for the entire summer, Claudia wondered. Her thoughts were interrupted by a low cry from Joy. Claudia saw Joy sitting up on the blanket, shading her eyes with one hand and staring out at the water. "I think we've got company," Joy declared. Sure enough, 2 boys were stepping out of the water. They were wearing blue, sleeveless wet suits and carrying pink and black surfboards under their arms. Claudia raised her hands to her mouth to cover a startled gasp. One of the boys she saw was Daniel. Daniel, the ghost boy. Chapter 8. The 2 boys stepped onto the sand, water dripping off their wetsuits. Shielding her eyes from the sun with her arm, Claudia realized the boy wasn't Daniel at all. It was another dark-haired boy. "What's happening to me? Am I getting really messed up?" she asked herself, watching the boys approach. She studied them as they tossed down their surfboards. They were about 17, both with strong, muscular builds. The one Claudia had thought was Daniel was slim with dark, razor-cut hair and gray eyes. He grinned at the girls, his eyes lingering on Claudia. She had a sinking feeling that what was making him grin was the sight of her face covered in pink sunblock. "We've got to get rid of them," Maria whispered, adjusting the top of her red bikini. "How come?" Claudia heard Joy whisper back. "They're cute." "Hey, how's it going?" the second boy called out. He had longish blonde hair and a more compact build, almost like that of a wrestler. His friend gazed down the shoreline toward Summerhaven. "I have a feeling we're way past the bird sanctuary." "You girls see any birds around here?" the blonde guy asked. His grin, Claudia saw, revealed about 400 teeth. "Just a couple of dodos," Maria said nastily. Claudia was surprised by Maria's meanness. Why was she on their case? Joy had climbed to her feet and was brushing back her hair and smiling at the 2 boys. Sophie remained under the shade of the umbrella, but she too seemed pleased by the surprise visitors. The boys' grins faded. The blonde-haired boy sauntered toward the blanket. "We were just taking out our boards and got caught in a really strong riptide," he pointed out toward the water. "It runs along the shore. It was amazing. Pulled us out here to the point before we even knew it." "How fascinating," Maria replied sarcastically. Claudia watched Joy roll her eyes. "Maria, will you please chill?" she whispered, her dark eyes on the boys. The dark-haired one followed his friend toward the blanket. "Watch out if you go swimming," he said very seriously. "If you get caught in that riptide, you could get pulled out beyond the point." Maria stood with her hands on the hips of her red swimsuit. "Thanks for the safety tip," she said coldly. "It was very nice of you to come warn us, but this is a private beach?" She pointed toward the sanctuary in Summerhaven. "If you want to surf, the public beach is down there?" The dark-haired boy grinned at Maria. "I thought all beaches were public," he said, studying her. He raised his eyes to the stairway that led up to her family's estate. "Has your family bought the ocean too?" The other boy sat down on the beach blanket and smiled at Sophie. "Hi, are you always this quiet?" Sophie grinned. She pulled off her glasses and smiled at him. "Not always." "Don't you think you should go now?" Maria asked, frowning unpleasantly. "Depends on what you have for lunch," the blonde boy told her. He slid the cooler over and lifted the lid. His friend held a hand out to Claudia. "I'm Carl. This is Dean, and thanks for inviting us to lunch." "Well?" Claudia found herself speechless. She glanced at Maria, who was fuming. Why is Maria so unfriendly, Claudia wondered. Does she know something about these boys? Is she really scared of them? "Wow, you must really hate the sun," Carl exclaimed, staring at Claudia's lotion-covered face. He laughed, shaking his head. Claudia could feel herself blushing underneath a thick layer of goo. I got a bad burn yesterday," she stammered. Kneeling on the blanket, Dean had begun emptying the cooler. "There's plenty here," he said. "Fried chicken, potato salad, lots of little sandwiches, picnic time." He raised his eyes from the cooler and smiled at Maria, a shark smile. Carl joined his friend, dropping down on the other side of the cooler. "Is there enough for the girls, too?" "Yeah, we can share," Dean replied, grinning his many-toothed grin. Maria, her hands in tight little fists, a furious expression on her face, started to say something, but Joy cut in. There's plenty of food, she told Maria. Why not share with them? Carl grinned at her appreciatively and offered her a plate of sandwiches. What's your name? Joy Birkin. She took the plate and sat down next to Carl. I'm Sophie Moore, Sophie offered brightly, moving out from under the umbrella to join them. The chicken does look good. I'm starving, even though we just ate breakfast. Maria stormed off to the water's edge, where she angrily ignored them all. Don't mind Maria. She's just a little shy, Joy said. How about you? Carl asked Claudia, his voice mocking. Are you shy too? That's why she's hiding behind that pink stuff, Dean teased, chewing on a chicken leg. Claudia knew she shouldn't care, but she was dying of embarrassment and knew she looked like a total dork. You should try that pink stuff, Dean told Carl. It would be an improvement on you. He tossed his chicken bone on the sand and grabbed for a sandwich. Hey, don't litter, Carl scolded his friend. Then he added, This is a private beach, remember? The two boys laughed heartily, slapping each other high fives. Joy asked them about surfboarding. It was obvious to Claudia that she was flirting with them. Obvious to the boys, too. After a while, Sophie and Carl moved under the umbrella, where they chatted quietly, sipping on cans of soda. The sun had moved higher in the sky. The ocean waves were lined with gold. This isn't a bad picnic, Claudia said, feeling a little strange about the situation. Too bad the princess over there won't join us, Dean said. Claudia saw Maria heading back toward them, taking long strides over the fine sand, her features set in anger. Did you save me a sandwich or something at least? There are some left, Dean replied, but you'll have to ask nicely. Maria uttered an angry groan and crossed her arms over her chest. I'm going to ask you nicely one more time to leave, she said through gritted teeth. Dean jumped up and stepped in front of her. Hey, give us a break, he pleaded, a mocking grin spreading over his face. He pushed a lock of blonde hair off his tanned forehead. Carl and I are great guys. Why the attitude? I'm warning you, Maria fumed. Just go, okay? Dean took a defiant step closer to her. Don't spoil the party, Maria. Is that your name, Maria? He glanced quickly back at his friend, who had come out from under the umbrella. Carl was staring at Dean warily, as if expecting trouble. Carl and I were hoping that after lunch, we'd all go up to your house and, party. Dean took another step toward Maria, who stepped back. Uh-oh, thought Claudia, climbing slowly to her feet. This is getting tense. Get back, go away, Maria cried, contempt in her eyes. No, really, Dean insisted. Carl and I are great guys. Let's go up to the house. It's too hot down here, don't you think? Carl was standing there, his smile fading, his features hardening. Are these guys just playing at being tough, Claudia wondered, drawing back, or are they really looking for trouble? I have an attack dog, Maria warned, glancing up at her house. An Irish wolfhound? Have you ever seen an Irish wolfhound? They're huge. Oh, I'm shaking all over, Dean cried, shaking his arms and legs. How about you, Carl? Chill, Carl said edgily. Let's just go, Dean. All I have to do is call the dog, Maria warned. Dogs like me, Dean boasted. I'm not scared. He turned to Claudia and the other girls. You want Carl and me to come up to the house, right? I think you better go, Claudia stammered, moving over to stand beside Maria. Dean moved closer, his expression menacing. You're not going to invite us up? He asked Maria, his eyes cold, his tone challenging. No way, Maria insisted. Then, before Claudia realized what was happening, she saw a blur of motion, and heard a loud smack. Maria staggered back with an angry cry. It took Claudia a long moment to realize that Dean had slapped Maria. Oh no, Claudia moaned, suddenly afraid. These boys are going to be trouble.